How are you? Good morning, everybody. Absolutely. Very wonderful about this morning. It's my pleasure to facilitate the panel discussion with our co-host, the Egyptian Stock Exchange, also the host country of this call that we're having today. I'm Shamika, I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and so absolutely critical conversation that we want to have today. Our topic is really about how the capital markets can enable the just transition and the role that they can play. So today I have a really learned panel, and from the Egyptian Stock Exchange representatives, Vice Chairman Heba Sarafi, of Israel. Such a pleasure to have you, Heba. Also, Ahmed Rushdi, the Head of Risk and Sustainability at the Egyptian Stock Exchange. Ivana Singh, the Head of Sustainable Finance at Nedbank, and of course, Olympus Nathaniel from DBSA, Head of Capital Finance. So we have different role players within the financial markets ecosystem here today. The capital markets in particular, the development bank, capital markets in terms of the stock exchange, the listed entities, and then of course from the banking system of our bank. So hopefully a really useful conversation on different parts of how that ecosystem can support the just transition. We've heard of the past few days how this massive financing gap is not going to be
additional financing flows in terms of the, from the north to the south and the supportive climate funds and the like. And a lot is going to have to come from the private sector and the types of entities that we have in the room today. Without further ado, I would like to hand over the mic for the opening address by Heba Sarafi, the Vice Chairperson of the Egyptian Stock Exchange. Heba? I'm not making the mistake on chairman. I use chairperson specifically in our gender neutrality.
It's not working. This one is not working. Better? Okay. Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and esteemed panelists, good morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be here today among you, actually discussing one of the most important topics that we have is how the role of the capital market in enabling a just transition, which is a very important topic nowadays. In a continent like Africa, the need to consider the systemic interconnection of both the socioeconomic as well as the environment issue will be key in ensuring the transition is supported by all parts of the financial ecosystem. A just transition to a green economy is more urgent than ever. the international community increasingly recognized the role that the business play in affecting both the environment and the society. To ensure a just transition, the financial sector should consider environmental and social outcomes in equal measures. However, this actually needs to be carefully managed through just transitional policy and processes, and there is a critical need for this transition actually to be fast and fair as recognized by the Paris Agreement. And we as a capital market capital market leaders, we actually bear the burden of managing the management of greening in the context of capital market, listed companies, and other market participants. In fact, capital markets are instrumental in enabling this transition because they provide capital and efficient risk-sharing mechanisms. The capital market also play a crucial role in enabling and transition to a zero economy and has a major influence on both the climate-related and social outcome. This impact actually comes from the sector business practice and from the activities it facilitates from access to capital and the financial service provided. But stock exchanges should also commit to the net zero. This commitment should go like hand in hand with the guidance and promotion of consistent, comparable, and reliable global climate disclosure. And stock exchange actually can lead this move for climate-related disclosure by providing guidance and capacity building to all listed companies and market participants. And this will help investors actually work with the issuers on sector-specific decarbonization approaches and therefore support the global decarbonization. As we know, the trends and global demand are now going towards green investments and low carbon economies. So accordingly, I would say like sound investment are actually needed to address the climate change to reduce emissions, promote adaptation, and build resilience. One other aspect that probably we could look at, so it's not only the capacity building programs and the promotion and the guidance that we should be giving to market participants, but also from another aspect is actually the establishment of the carbon credit markets. The carbon credit markets should also actually open the gate for funding green investment and decarbonization projects. I just don't want to take more than that. I would say this is a COP actually from commitment to implementation. So we really want to see and want to ensure finance for both adaptation and mitigation taking place. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heba, for those words and for the inspiration and also for the heads up that we need to move to implementation. Yesterday, we were at this pavilion and our Minister for Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, Minister Creasy, was here. And she says we have to move from the talk department to the spanner department is what she called it. And those who are here today would remember that comment that she said. But I would like to move first to a development bank perspective. And Olympus, you've been working in the development space for a very long time now. And I think it would be really helpful to get a real life perspective before we go into the capital market side on our side as to what's happening. You know, the role of development banks is somewhat different to traditional banks. And you also have far more involved role in helping alleviate those real life challenges on the ground. So maybe you can say to me, what is this reality that we're dealing with? And what are you seeing as the key emerging practical challenges on the continent in relation to, you know, enabling the just transition?
Thank you very much. And thanks again for the invitation. Just thinking about where to start, I think we are all agreed that significant resources required for us to be able to advance the climate agenda. And it is not a mistake that you see, especially developing countries, agitating for more financial flows into climate, and for the developing nations to keep to their commitments with regard to ensuring that sufficient resources are made available. What we've been trying to do on our side from a DBSA point of view in support of that was to say, looking at the limited resources that are available, what is the best way to ensure that we use those limited resources to leverage significant resources that we know are available in the private investment space. And I think that is a very important intervention. But I think what I think is even more key is to think about what happens when the resources are made available. Are we ready to move towards implementation? And I think what we see in the market is that there is a challenge where you need to develop a significant and robust pipeline that would match the resources that you are calling for in the market if we are to be successful. So we're talking about obviously the climate emergency, which means we have to implement with speed. One of the things that we think is quite key that we do from the Development Bank is really our interventions around project preparation. Because as I've mentioned, the challenge of building a robust pipeline, the resources that are available for project preparation, in my view, aren't sufficient and they need to be enhanced. And I think it's an area that we should be looking at. But one of the things which is important in my view around project preparation is that because you are starting at an earlier phase, you have an opportunity to start thinking about inculcating climate issues in developing your project. But even more importantly, starting to think about how the projects that you are going to implement are going to impact communities and integrate just transition imperatives within your project development stages. Therefore, having a pipeline that is ready to implement to address climate change while also ensuring that social issues are not left behind. So the other intervention that we look at from a DBSA point of view, which I think is quite key, is that outside of just project preparation, we tend to have a big part of our book in the municipal space. And within the municipal space, the challenges around capacity could be acute, even starting at the planning stage. So what we have been doing recently is to say, even as you start at the planning stage, ensure that the basis of your planning is within the right context from a climate point of view, so that when those plans are translated into infrastructure projects, you're already on your way to positioning your projects in a way that they address these two imperatives that we talked to. So I think that is an important thing. And I think the other part of your question had to do with, from an innovative point of view, what are some of the things that we are looking at? I was just having a conversation with my colleague Avana now just before we started around our accreditation to various climate financing mechanisms. And one of the things that we have been doing recently, especially looking at the challenges that we face in implementing projects within those contexts, was to say the various climate financing mechanisms, they've got various emphasis or different emphasis. For example, we would be accredited to the Global Environmental Facility and also to the Green Climate Fund. So we would tend to use the GEF to create an enabling environment. But even at that stage, we're already thinking about how do we get to pilot and then to implementation. And therefore, how do we position whatever we start at concept stage to be positioned for potential support by GCF at pilot and also at implementation. And we found that to be, working quite well. And I think, at least in my view, I think it's some innovation that we are looking at in terms of how we use the resources that are available to us. Maybe let me stop there for now. Can pick it up later. Thank you.
Thank you, Lempisa. That's really helpful because you're touching on where you're trying to implement just transition considerations on the ground, but also the way in which you're trying to use that funding in a smart way that does those things likely that commercial finance might not be able to really support. And so we're creating that environment, and then hopefully the projects that come on top of that are commercially viable. So you're laying the groundwork, if I understand you correctly, in many instances. Okay. Thank you, Olympus. I'm going to move to Ahmed. Ahmed, you've been working in this as well for quite a bit of time, and we're going to move to the opposite end of the continent. We really are polar opposites, aren't we? Can you share with us your perspective in a different region? What are the challenges in meeting the financing needs of climate change, and how are you as an exchange trying to solve some of this?
Okay, actually, thanks, Jamila, for the introduction, and thanks for having such wonderful attendees. Let us first define the climate finance, okay? And what are the main sources for the climate finance? We have 4 sources of climate finance: the public sources, the private capital, in addition to the development banks and carbon markets too, okay? Both the developed and developing countries actually are suffering from devastating climate change, but the access to climate finance in the developing country faces a lot of obstacles and challenges, okay? Despite having the Article 9 of the Paris Agreement, which stated that developed countries shall provide financial resources to assist developing countries with respect to both climate change mitigation and adaptation, okay? So when it comes to developing countries, we have a lot of challenges in facing the climate finance. One major challenge is the lack of national climate strategies, okay, and climate action. And here, let me grab one word from Mrs. Heba, moving from commitment to implementation, which means we need a lot of action, not only strategy for the climate change, but we need a dynamic and actionable strategy for the climate finance as a part of the addressing climate change in the developing countries. Second part is actually the lack of climate informed and climate resilience development planning. And here comes to the integrations of both the climate change strategy and the economic development strategies and plans for the developing countries, okay? Third, actually, we can see that the third obstacle and challenge is the lack of cohesive regulations, okay, that ensure the quality of the financed project in the climate finance ecosystem, okay? And lack of the climate finance option, the awareness of the climate finance options, actually, okay? Like the carbon credits, a new innovative and a new solution from the capital markets, okay? And a specific issue in the emerging markets and developing country is the insufficient administrative capacity and the knowledge and technical knowledge of the finance of the climate finance options and how we can deal with the climate finance and enable the climate finance. Okay, here actually came the role of capital markets as an enabler for the climate finance. Capital markets actually have a lot of innovative solutions and products that can provide access to capital finance, like the voluntary carbon market that EGX announced yesterday, okay? And having such a carbon market actually can enable the projects and specifically the NDCs, the national determined contribution of the developing countries, okay, and can help them to achieve their goal in the reduction, okay. So one last thing, actually, I'd like to mention about Egypt in this specific and topic, which is climate finance. Egypt actually managed to issue the national climate change strategy earlier this year. The national strategy consists of 5 pillars. The first one is enabling the climate finance infrastructure through the enhancing and enabling the green bonds and green finance. Okay, introducing new innovative solutions like the carbon exchange and carbon market, the voluntary one. Okay, and actually we are trying to cope with these changes. And one of the most important part of this strategy, it came actually to integrate the economic development plan of Egypt with the national climate change strategy of Egypt. So we will be moving from commitment to implementation through, let's say, integrating the climate finance with the and actually the climate change challenges and other perspective into the national development plan for Egypt. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. Nice examples of being able to integrate the national planning into what the markets can do. And if I could just add, if I look at it also from our exchange perspective, you know, there's the opportunity to use those instruments, those innovative ones. In our case, you know, well, I guess it's not so new anymore, but, you know, green bonds have been around on the JSE since 2017. And then 2 years ago, we also included sustainability bonds and social bonds onto the market. So you can come to a listed, regulated platform. So there isn't the concerns around the greenwashing. Hopefully that some of that's mitigated because these instruments are regulated. And then also things like looking at sustainability linked bonds, where you can actually get an actual capital benefit, a cost of capital benefit if you meet the objectives that have been aligned with your with what you're wanting to do with those projects. So if you meet your goals and sustainability linked KPIs on those, you can get a step down on your interest rate, which is a really good way of linking what we can do to the markets as debt capital markets, and in actually being able to enable the cost projects. And then, and similarly for the just transition on the JSE side, earlier this year, we went live with the just transition, with the transition segment, which is actually specifically acknowledging those types of, you know, financing, or the financing that's needed for projects that are in between brown and green, should I say, that are on the pathway towards green, but not quite green yet. And very critical, I think, for countries like ours, where we know that we're not going to switch over overnight. And so those are the types of things, I think, just to add from that perspective, if that is helpful. And Ahmed, I want to also say, I mean, a country like Egypt has also, please just forgive me, my connection is not working well today. Okay. So in a country like Egypt, if I could just ask you right now, like many other countries, you're facing, you know, grain shortages, looming debt crises. How does that impact, though, the country's focus on climate change? And is there a trade-off between, you know, this short-term pressure, if I could call it that, and the longer-term objectives of trying to mitigate climate change?
Okay, actually, I can't see any trade-offs. There should not be any trade-off between the short-term pressure and the long-term needs, because actually the climate is changing. Okay, no one is gonna stop it, because we need to have an effective action, okay, to mitigate the climate change efforts. The climate change actually impact on Egypt and other developing countries. Okay, but what I can see actually from the Egyptian, let's say, experience in the carbon credit market, that we need to build a resilient hub for African market. Okay, African carbon market. Our market actually is not an Egyptian one; it is an African carbon perspective. Okay, which aims at developing the continent, because we know that the African continent contributes to only 3.8% of the global emission, while it is the most impacted part of the world with the extreme weather and extreme climate change. Okay, so we need to have the proper climate finance through the voluntary carbon market. And what is EGX doing is transforming the market into an African hub for the carbon credits. Okay, and let me just a second. See, yes, this one. I wish I can have that presentation for the audience, but I'd like to give a little brief on the voluntary carbon market actually. Okay, so okay. In creating our market, we have like the three part of the supply chain: the supply side of the carbon credits, the intermediates, and the demand side. At the supply side, actually, EGX, okay, established a joint venture with one of the Egyptian companies, which is Libra Capital, to ensure the pipeline of the supply side. We will be having like 7.2 million of carbon credits through our partnership with the Libra Carbon for the next 2 years, in addition to some other aggregators and project developers in the VCM ecosystem, which will be providing like 10 million carbon credits for the next coming years. Okay, we have also like coordinated with the international registries like the Vera and the Gold Standard, the GCC, which is the Global Council for Global Carbon Council, okay, and the UN-ICA African registry, which is being developed right now under the umbrella of UN. Also in the supply side, we have a bottleneck and in the verification and validation process, which is represent actually the bottleneck of the voluntary carbon market, with high fixed cost facing every single project that is aiming at reduce carbon credit and issue the carbon credits. The validation and the verification is very expensive actually for African projects and African companies aiming at reducing the carbon credits. Okay, at the intermediate side, actually we have been touching with multinational and a lot of international actually technology provider and trading system providers, and we can see that the blockchain technology is the best technology to be used in the carbon credits market. Okay, so voluntary or even compliance market. Okay, and the third side actually, and the final one is the demand side. We can see that having the net zero commitments, as mentioned by Mrs. Heba Surfi, the role of exchange is to encourage listed companies to move to the net zero commitment, and actually exchange itself, like JSE, must go to the net zero commitment. All the net zero commitment represents a huge demand for the carbon credits, and this is considered one of the most important source of growth for the carbon credits in the next few years. We have been also in touch with some financial institution, international platform cooperation with the Egyptian exchange. But moving on, we need to address some policy considerations for the voluntary carbon market. First one is regarding the market participation. Okay, we need to answer these questions. Okay, to what degree and to what degree, who to allow for open, broad market participation? Is it individuals, okay, or companies or corporates or financial institutions that can be trade and buy the carbon credits? Okay, we can see that almost it's in corporates right now, but there is a need for individuals to participate in the carbon credits market. Second one is the integrity and the transparency. Okay, we know that integrity of the carbon credits is a very crucial issue in creating the ecosystem for the carbon credits. Okay, we need to ensure sufficient integrity through the cohesive regulations, and we would like to have a synchronized regulations for the carbon credits for the validation and verification process across all African countries. Okay, we need to have a less cost and more effective validation and verification through standardized and synchronized regulation. Okay. And the third issue is actually the price discovery. We know that the African carbon credits price is discounted and we can tackle this issue. We need to address the price discovery of the African carbon credits and why it is discounted, it's sold and discounted compared to other carbon credits. Is it integrity issue? We can address the integrity. Okay. Is it validation and verification? We need to address this issue too. Okay. So finally, and the final consideration in the voluntary carbon market is managing the VCM risks. And VCM risks have actually here contains a cash settlement or physical delivery risks of the carbon credits. We need to ensure we have the proper governance, okay, and internal auditing and risk management framework to ensure that there is no risk in trading carbon credits. There is no settlement risk. There is no physical delivery risk too. And finally, we'd like to have a proper identification and managing and resolving conflicts of interest in the carbon credits market. Okay, so this is what EGX actually sees in the voluntary carbon market ecosystem. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ahmed. I think for the huge opportunity that the carbon markets provide, but I think also a key point around saying that up to now, traditionally, the African carbon credits have been discounted, yet they come usually with so many co-benefits. If you think about the fact that the generation is coming from projects that are sitting potentially in rural areas, underserved areas, so the opportunity to actually get those benefits to go back into communities through that mechanism is huge. And so I think there's an opportunity there also to work closely with the international system to actually understand the value of an African carbon credit differently. The other thing that I think I picked up from that is the need for the ecosystem collaboration, is that an exchange is never going to do it on their own, and no player on their own is going to do that. So that's another opportunity. And I think when we're talking about carbon markets or markets generally having to work within the ecosystem, there's another opportunity that I see there, and that is for skills development. Because if we're talking about the cost of verification and validation really becoming prohibitive in some instances, is there not an opportunity for us as a continent to bring down that cost and develop the skills that are going to be needed in a low carbon economy?
We have the chance actually to tackle the validation and verification, okay, process and the high cost through a regulated and standardized regulations for the validation and verification. And we need here actually to have on board all the African stakeholders like the UNECA. We have already announced the African Carbon Market Initiative like 2 days ago. EGX announced the carbon credits, the voluntary carbon credits. Okay, so we need all the stakeholders to ensure that regulation is well set for the carbon credits, to ensure that the African can be a hub for the carbon credit supply globally. Okay.
Thank you, Ahmed. I think the point also to remember is that we need to start seeing our natural resources and our carbon sinks in our continent as productive assets that can benefit in a broader market globally.
Monetizing the efforts of reduction is the aim of this carbon credit.
Absolutely, because I think, I think we're probably close to net positive as a continent in terms of the carbon sinks that we actually have, and the need to preserve those and give a bigger value to them is critical right now from a natural asset perspective. Ivana, let me move to you. We've heard from Ahmed and Olympus about some practical considerations, and your role really at Nedbank is to look at innovative solutions within the remit of commercial banks, and banks have a hugely important role to play and will have an even more important role going forward in that. And how do you see the role of a bank like yours in supporting some of the needs which especially might not be immediately commercially viable, but need to be on a pathway to get there.
Sure, thanks, Shamila. And I think the role that we can play is probably manifold. Initially it starts with actually providing advice to our clients or to potential clients around what needs to be in place before they can actually access the listed market. And that may be from a size perspective, what is an optimal size? What are those terms and conditions under listed programs that need to be in place before you can access the market, and also provide a read of what investors are looking for. And I think there's a lot of value we can add in that equation by being close to the market in terms of what type of structures they would like to see, what format, what tenors, what size, and ultimately what protections and covenants need to be in place for the borrower. I think in addition to that, it's around being able to also facilitate those conversations in a way where if it's not ready for commercial banking listed space, potentially there's an unlisted market that you could go to, or we can hand them over to our DFIs in the project prep phase. So really pointing them in the right direction in that ecosystem of financing. And I think thirdly, there are pockets of liquidity from a foundation point of view, where there is these sources of patient capital, which may become more available, but that's really around pooling those resources from a foundation perspective and pooling that with other foundations, such as our corporate clients who also have foundations with certain focuses. I think that's where we can play a role.
Thanks, Ivana. So, and that's very interesting, right? About looking at accessing foundation money and somehow blending that in your commercial space. Maybe you can share with us some examples of what you've seen, how that's been done well, other way elsewhere, but also, if you have any examples from Nedbank.
Sure. So I think in terms of where we've played, it's really been mobilizing external donor money alongside us. And ultimately that comes with actually knowing what pots of liquidity are out there. So it does take a little bit of mining and understanding of this universe. And once you've got a sense of those different mandates and what type of criteria they're looking for, you actually want to find that lowest common denominator amongst the various mandates and ultimately structure a solution that can bring in each of those pots. So ultimately the criteria that you devise, you may not necessarily fit neatly into a green climate fund mandate, for example, which we were speaking about earlier, but how then do we take that feedback back to each of these investors and keep on refining those structures? And an example of that, which we spoke about yesterday, was that of the Green Residential Development Fund, where we brought in DFI money alongside commercial investor money, and also structured the instrument in a manner to make it appealing to donors. So that's an example. I think through our foundation as well, we also invested in things like social impact bonds. And effectively what we've done there is we've provided a portion in the capital structure, which is the patient capital. So it allows us to get interest back later, but ultimately fill a gap in that overarching structure that would not have necessarily been filled.
And Ivana, I mean, not to put you on the spot, but how's the take up of that been? Like, how's the market received those kinds of structures, which are fairly new, I think, in our market?
Yeah, look, I think the trick is that your commercial investors will always want to get a commercial return. And I think there's no going back from that. There are a few investors who may provide a value for that, which we call it as a greenium. But in order to get that greenium, you really got to make sure that, first of all, the credit quality has got to stack up and the sustainability story has got to be credible. And from that, there is value that can be derived in that market. And I think by bringing alongside other players, that's just the risk sharing element that we're talking about. And that brings a lot more comfort and helps to crowd in that additional liquidity.
Okay. Thanks, Ivana. I know that you explained the approach yesterday with a bit more detail, but I think we have a slightly different audience today. So I'm going to ask you to do it again, please, on how you've blended that finance and then unlocked both the opportunity, and the benefit for retail as well as for the developers.
Sure. So maybe if we can speak through the ecosystem. As a bank, we currently have a retail banking arm, we have a property finance arm, and we have an investment banking arm. And effectively, we've identified an opportunity for sustainable growth by being able to plug a gap in the economy. And that gap was that we currently do not have a lot of green residential housing available, primarily targeted at the affordable housing segment. And effectively, then we said, well, through our property finance division, we're constantly financing clients, but we need to help incentivize this market to go green and to build green. So how can we do that? Because it does come at a premium. We then effectively work together with the IFC, as well as a program called the Market Accelerator for Green Industry Construction, which is a blend finance program facilitated by UK donors. And we work together to come up with a value proposition which would help to crowd in that liquidity into a trusted partner like Nedbank and enable us to deploy that to our clients. Now, effectively what we did was we looked to raise R1 billion. We secured an anchor investor in the form of the IFC, which effectively anchored at the tighter end of price guidance for a tenure of 7 years. We then went to the market to effectively raise the rest of the funding. And once we've got the funding in, this funding is now being deployed to finance developers, specifically who are building green. In addition to that, the blend finance incentive that has come through it's actually a dollar-based incentive, but it's paid over in 2 phases. The one being upon design phase of the building being green, so it's a milestone-based basis, and the second on certification. So it actually covers the cost of the greening elements of the building, which is really just a pass-through to our developers. And then thirdly, there's a training element from the Excellence in Design and Green Efficiencies program, because there's not many EDGE certified developments in the residential space, and our developers need to understand this. We as banks also need to understand this in terms of valuing the building and what that means. And ultimately, we rolled out a training program with staff, as well as we're currently doing that with our client base.
Okay. Thanks, Ivana. I think so many touch points there on innovation. And, earlier on, Heba talked about capacity building as well. And you brought all of those elements into your structure.
Yes,
So,
exactly,
yeah.
Shamila. And I think it's also providing the retail loans in the back of that for the offtake, which also helps in the sense that you can put up these green residential developments, but you need to make sure that you get consumers buying into that. And then that's where we've got the green home loan product as well to incentivize consumers to buy.
So both the supply side and the demand side, there's the supply of the green buildings, which is critical because the building sector is a significant part of carbon emissions. And then the demand side to get people to actually buy those green buildings and then supplement that, I think is quite helpful. So thank you for that, Ivana. And before we open up for questions, Olympus, I want to come back to you. And your role specifically focuses on climate finance. So I want to ask you maybe to look into a future and create for us, if you have an ideal scenario for how you would like the funding for the just transition to come together to meet our common needs, what would that look like? And who would be financing what aspects of the transition if you had your ideal world?
Thank you very much. I think the first thing I just wanted to talk to is, obviously, if you were to isolate what you'd refer to as just transition activities, you'd have to think about appropriate financing instruments that would be suitable for implementation. But I think from experience, you'd find that sometimes where you are thinking about implementing just transition activities in isolation, in most cases, you find that you could have a challenge from a sustainability point of view in terms of sustaining those activities over a period of time. So my thinking has been as follows to say, it probably might be a better idea to be thinking about using your large infrastructure interventions as an anchor for JT activities, to an extent that as you plan the implementation of those projects, as I mentioned earlier, you're already thinking about the JT activities that go together with that. And I think when you think about that, the immediate thing that comes to mind is that you are implementing within host communities. Therefore, already you are thinking about the municipal context within which those communities exist, because it's not just the workers that you are talking to in the particular entity that you could be looking at implementing a project in. So that is why I think it is important to be thinking about the whole of that context, integrate it into the planning of your project to an extent that even in the financing of the particular infrastructure interventions that you might have in mind, you could think about a financial structure that already talks to the financing instruments that talk to the JT activities. What I think that would do is that, where interested investors in JT activities could be concerned about the potential lack of sustainability, the fact that those activities are anchored by a well-structured project and the financing structure is blended within, an integrated structure could improve in terms of the confidence first in investing in those activities, but also in making sure that the activities themselves could benefit from the anchor, projects so that, sustainability is enhanced. I really think, maybe this is not applicable in all environments, but I really think it's an important consideration if we are to give, JT activities a boost, which can include anything from, your skills development, your enterprise development, and various other interventions, and I think that could even extend to saying, let's say the choice of your technologies. When you choose the technologies that you're going to utilize, maybe let's say you are thinking about the repurposing or repowering of a power station. Could it be that the technologies that you choose, you are considering how much they enhance your ability to ensure that you are involving your communities in it, to an extent that maybe it could get to a point where, I always say this, that we are always thinking about the least cost technology in the choice of what we do. But could it be that we need to get to a point where you have to start thinking about the technology that brings about the highest dividend in terms of how much you can be able to pull communities in? And if that comes with a premium, think about the appropriate way to cover that premium so that you can enhance the effectiveness of your JT activities. Thank you.
Olympus, so much for us to think about there. You completely took the technology argument and turned it on its head a little bit, right? To use the financing differently, to actually think, is the technology aligned to what the community is going to need and where the biggest dividend is there? I think that's a very useful perspective to have, rather than the lowest cost perspective. Thank you. But also what you've brought home is the need to think about the implementation on the ground, not just the ideal instruments at that level and how that could come together, but it's going to be fit for purpose financing for that. And so the innovation around that, I think, is going to be critically important. Also, the need for all those actors in that financial system to come together. I'm hoping you're going to convene us soon, Olympus. I want to open up to the audience for any questions. We have an esteemed panel, please. Yes.
So with such an esteemed panel of market participants, what I guess I'd like to ask is, you've spoken quite a bit about innovative instruments like carbon credits, the green bonds issued by Nedbank. Does the panel have any thoughts on protection solutions like catastrophe bonds, pandemic bonds, and other instruments that you have in jurisdictions, for example, in Bermuda, in the United Kingdom, Hong Kong, Singapore? Why are we not seeing developments in the insurance-linked securities markets in Africa that could provide an element of protection for loss and damage due to climate change?
Anyone want to take that one? Ivana, do you want to have a bit?
Thanks. Yeah, and it's a good question. And I think we could say the same for the things like blue bonds in terms of ocean economy and developing that. So I think we need to recognize that Africa has been at the infancy of green bond development. I think, as Shamila said, it only started in 2017. And a large amount of focus of liquidity flows has been around how do we reduce carbon emissions and how do we ensure that we meet this race against climate change. So that's where the predominant focus has been. And in order for you to actually issue in this market, you need a pot of liquidity, of supply to support you. So based on that, I think we've seen a lot of issuance on green, but I think that will expand over time as the market continues to develop into other forms of innovative instruments as well.
Thanks, Ivana.
Hi, good morning. Wendy McCallum from Stellenbosch University in South Africa. So we've heard about KPI or milestone-based financial structuring and incentivization. Olympus is talking about an impact dividend and how do we finance that? And then very importantly, we hear verification being very key to the integrity of these instruments, but it's very costly. So based on these thoughts, my question is, what is or should be the responsibility of financiers ensuring that the environmental and the social impact that you are envisaging in the finance actually is happening on the ground? So not the greenwashing that you're trying to avoid.
On looking at that?
Wendy, let me attempt to answer your question. I think probably I was having a conversation with you sometime that it has been quite easy for various entities, for example, to announce, their net zero targets by 2050. But typically what happens is after the announcement, you're thinking about how is that going to happen? And a whole lot of things with regard to implementation comes to mind. It be instruments that you have in place, the appropriate tools that are there, the processes that you have to, to implement, policies that have to, get the implementation of that. So I think it's an important part that enables implementation. If you don't have that base in place, then you find that the implementation phase be quite a challenge. So what we have found in our experience from a DBSA point of view has been exactly that. When we go towards implementation, we have found in many cases, we have had to step back. What has been useful for us is the partnerships that we have had to be able to share nodes around, as I mentioned, the systems, the processes, the tools that are required for implementation, and baseline studies that we can compare nodes with peers to develop that. But it has always been a journey, and I think it's still a process that we are, going through, and hopefully we are getting there. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. I think, similarly, just to answer the question a little bit more directly, it's important that we build in those reporting mechanisms into actual legal documentation with our clients. So when we do finance, we take a lot of guidance from the principles, but really build in those protections. And, to the extent things are not implemented, there are things like declassification events that have come about to ensure that, this actually, should it still be classified as a green instrument or not, if it falls outside of the principles. So we have built in those mechanisms. There are reporting that is in place, and really is a conversation with your clients as we all on this journey together. And I think once you understand there is a credible strategy and plan behind that, you can support it. But once you see that, there are signs of this not being credible, then there is a robust conversation that needs to be had.
If I can add on that one, if I look at the listed space, for example, the rules that are built in on the green bond segment or the sustainability segment require that you need to have a second opinion, and you need to have that a report given for that with your reporting every year that backs up that, particularly if it's a use of proceeds instrument that now looks at and said, okay, yes, you're continuing to use those proceeds the way you said you were using them, and here's a report on the latest use of that. So there's a requirement behind that for reporting in the public domain that facilitates that. And of course, you might have the regulator knocking on your door should you not do that. So there are some of those mechanisms built in the listed space. And I think Ivana's mentioned to how that happens in their space as well. Ahmed, how about you want to maybe add anything on your side? In addition on looking at how one makes sure that reporting is credible and that backs up that and the impact. Yeah.
No, I mean, yes, you're absolutely right. Actually, it's a very good question because I was going to ask him the same question. And aside from greenwashing, yes, you really need to ensure that this is really happening. And the part of the disclosure part, yeah, that's very important. If you have a progressive disclosure regarding what happened with the proceeds of the bonds, and you need to disclose that to the market, it should give like some kind of comfort to the investors. That's exactly what we have, as a matter of fact, and it goes on a semi-annual basis.
Seems we're competing. We're competing with the party next door. Any other questions? We probably have time for one more before we wrap up. They're wanting to go see what's happening next door. Okay, I'm just checking. Any other hands? No? Okay. So I want to maybe then wrap up and say thank you very much, firstly, to our panelists and the EGX who's co-hosted with us. It's been fantastic to have you, and I think a lot to look forward to. I'm hoping what today has done is made it clearer for you how the different parts of the capital markets are going to work together and the opportunities they have to enable a just transition. And I think it's critically important that there's greater understanding of that generally, and that understanding is going to stimulate more participation, but most importantly, more innovation in how these elements can fit together. Because there's no doubt that the route that got us here is not going to get us out of here. And so we really do have to think differently about this. I want to thank the participants for sharing great examples of different things. And I'm going to hand over to Heba to close off for us today.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just want to actually add a last concluding remark, which is having the proper regulatory infrastructure in place. That's very important. And what Ahmed was saying is that we have it's going to be having a harmonized regulatory framework for the African market, just to make sure that we don't have like this greenwashing, just to make sure that we have the proper validation and verification, because there's very much this very costly, as a matter of fact, and it has really become prohibitive. And that's the key, I think. And I think the kind of regulatory, as long as you're going to be having a cohesive regulatory framework, I think it should pave the way for a very successful, actually, transition period to a green economy. I think so. Thank you.
There are little gifts from the Johannesburg Stock Exchange if anybody would like to take some. I just want to make note that the paper is plantable, so please go put it in your garden, and I hope you'll send us some pictures of what it looks like in a few weeks' time. Which test? All the base. Can I take a second? Stand on that side. I have to be in the way.
So let me know when I'm fixed. I'll let you know, yeah. Sure. Yeah, I'm okay. So I'm just waiting. I think there's some problem with
in South Africa. I'm very excited to be part of this event today as we bring together, I think, different parts of the continent in an initiative that's really aimed at bringing into this wonderful opportunity for economic transformation, a whole range of businesses who will form, that economy of the future. In terms of our agenda today, once I have just welcomed you all, we will also be getting an insight into how the CFA operates around the world. And that presentation will be given to us by Ian Milborough from PwC. We'll also be getting an insight into how I think the CFA is trying to put together this broader ecosystem that's enabling implementation across the continent. And that will be a presentation from Dr. Alhamdu, who will be talking from the AFDB's perspective on some of those collaboration opportunities. We're very fortunate today that we have representatives from the different countries that are participating in the CFA on the continent, and they'll be able to share very specific insights and perspectives on what is happening in terms of rolling out the CFA, just reflecting where different countries have started from. And then finally, we'll have opportunity for questions, I think, from the audience. So I hope you're preparing your questions, your comments, your thoughts as we go through the session before we close. So with that, I'm very happy to hand over to Ian, who's going to give us a good sense of what the CFA is and where we are now since the program has been rolled out across the world.
So, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and thank you very much for coming to join us today. I also thank you for your forbearance in these pavilions, as sometimes the acoustics can be a little challenging. So welcome. I'm a partner at PwC, and we've had the privilege of working on the CFA for a number of years. The CFA is a multi-year technical assistance program funded by UK government, and it's really about practical ways of getting projects investment ready. So very much aligned to some of the macro themes you're hearing at this COP about how do we genuinely mobilize climate finance and make the dollars flow. The program operates in 8 countries, 3 African countries, so Nigeria, Egypt, and South Africa, as well as other middle-income countries. And our work is led by in-country delivery partners, some of whom will be speaking today. And I think the first point I'd like to convey is that, in my view, the CFA addresses what I call the missing middle. So you have a lot of top-down macro policy initiatives designed to enable decarbonisation, and you have a lot of bottom-up activities about developers with good ideas, clean tech ideas. And this CFA, this intervention, is really trying to mesh those 2 initiatives. So supporting development and bring forward a pipeline of investable projects that can go through the funding cycle. The CFAs that we'll talk about today builds on really strong early work that was funded by BEIS since 2017, working in Colombia and Mexico, and introducing investors from the City of London to those projects in the region, and many of those have resulted in successful transactions or ongoing collaborations. Okay, so what are we actually doing? I think this slide is trying to illustrate the flow of our activities under the CFA. So there are 4 phases, as you can see here. The first is really working with our delivery partners to map the climate landscape. So we're thinking about the barriers that are restricting capital from flowing to meaningful project activities and the gaps in the supply and demand landscape. In some of the countries we worked in, we found that capital markets are quite deep. So there's a broad spectrum of finance providers, from venture capital, established capital, concessionary debt providers, etc. In other markets, they're quite thin. So you need to think much more in terms of a blended finance concept for early stage activities, combining grant monies, concessional monies with commercial terms financing. And that, in my view, as a corporate financier, is one of the key things we need to do. We need to get different parts of the market to price the risks that they best understand and to crowd in broader public money. And then we have in-country delivery. What we typically tend to do is launch a call for proposals, an open call, depending on the country, typically a minimum of $1 million US spend, and projects typically at pre-feasibility stage. So another element that is important to BEIS and important to us is that we very much incorporate gender and social inclusion into the type of projects that we fund, and that's been a key theme underpinning our work today. And Jack will talk about some of the successes, I think, in his remarks later. And then we have a London event, and a little plug that the next London event will be in March 2023 in a very desirable venue in the City of London, which I won't reveal to you at this point, but do make the effort to come. And I think that's very much about, again, combining the City of London as very much a centre for green finance, with a diverse set of funders with these project developers, and introducing those a little bit like a matchmaking exercise, but having gone through the technical assistance to get them investable. And the final point there I'd call out on item 4 is what I think is very much important from a development finance point of view, is embedding this program in national institutions and national structures. So after the technical assistance finishes, we will need to think about the legacy value of the intervention. So we're really working with countries and hosts to think about how CFA is embedded, whether that be in governmental agencies or connected to other bilateral or multilateral initiatives in the future. And I think Obi from Nigeria will talk to some of those remarks for Nigeria context. Can you go on the slide? We could have the next slide, please. Thank you. And I think this slide, because I don't want to talk too long and I want to make adequate time for my other panelists, but I think this is a number slide and what I hope brings the program to life. We're really quite proud of these achievements to date. CFA is just coming into its second year of 4 years, as I mentioned, and I just want to call out some of those achievements. The first, I think, is about generating deal flow, generating pipeline in those countries. As you can see there, we've sourced a pipeline of over 90 projects with an investment ask of over $2 billion, and that's from over 600 project submissions. We delivered that tailored capacity building support to project developers on the ground, focused on investment readiness, climate impact, and the gender and social inclusion. And again, just to give you a tangible example of what that means, many people have great ideas, but you couldn't put them in front of a financier because the governance or the structure of the project needs fundamental change. So it's really supporting those folks to get to a term sheet, to think about how they can be investment ready. The third point I'd call out is the convening power of the CFA. We supported project and investor workshops reaching over 3,000 people and over 60 financial institutions. And finally, what's this all about? It's about getting to financial close. It's about getting the dollars to flow to underlying activities. 6 projects are either at financial close or will get to financial close very shortly or in the advanced stages of securing funding. And that, I feel, is a real tangible outcome of our activities today. And finally, the legacy value of supporting policymakers of how they galvanize activities like this in support of their NDCs. So, ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to drone on too long as there are other great speakers on the panel, but I'll hang back to Red Demetse to give you a sense of what's going on in some of our activities on the ground. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Ian, for that introduction to the CFA. Just really giving us a good sense of what the program seeks to achieve, but also some of the great achievements and accomplishments that have been made over the past few years. I think it's really important to highlight that this is a program that brings this key element into, I think, joining the dots, building the ecosystem of providing capacity. And for me, providing that capacity means that a whole lot more enterprises, businesses, actors in the economy can be part of making this transition happen in a way that is inclusive and really does bring a whole range of opportunities across the economy. So I think that's a really key element, but thank you for highlighting the other benefits I think that the CFA has brought to the countries in which it is being implemented, of really connecting the dots and making things happen. With that said, I would like to hand over to Dr. Alhamdu, who's from the African Development Bank, who is going to give us a sense of some of the work that the bank is currently implementing, and I think really importantly, how we're using all of these different initiatives to build the kind of ecosystem that we need across the continent. Thank you very much, Dr. Alhamdu.
Thank you very much. Let me thank you for the opportunity to participate in this very important event and to give remarks on behalf of the African Development Bank. We have been talking to CFA, CFIA at the second quarter of this year, and the bank has found that your activities are in alignment with our goal of promoting green investment in private sector and SMEs in Africa. As you know, the low level of public and private sector finance mobilized so far is likely to hamper the ability of African countries to deliver on their nationally determined contributions. African countries need significant resources to implement their NDCs, and according to our recent estimates, 75% of those resources have to come from the private sector. And this calls for more action to mobilize financial resources towards low carbon and climate resilient investments and development in the continent. The African Development Bank recognizes that private sector's ability to contribute to Africa's climate resilience and green recovery agenda is constrained by the limited technical capacity, lack of bankable projects, ability to raise climate funds, and availability of reliable climate information. To address this challenge, we recently engaged in policy dialogues with Africa's private sector, with the aim to creating an enabling environment for private sector participation in climate actions in Africa. Through our sovereign and non-sovereign operations, we are already deploying a wide range of financial instruments to enable private sector investment in climate action across the continent, including through loans, partial risk and partial credit guarantees, and green bonds, as well as green line of credit to financial institutions, as well as technical assistance for private sector to develop bankable projects. Being a leading development partner of African countries, the African Development Bank views its support for private sector development in Africa as the principal means to fulfill its mandate to contribute to sustainable development and social progress of African countries. In terms of climate change, we are using several ways to support resource mobilization for climate action. These include mobilizing our own internal climate finance, mobilizing regular lending operations by the bank and its partners, as well as external resources and technical assistance to our regional member countries through initiatives such as the Africa NDC Hub and other partnerships, including the one we have with the Green Global Center on Adaptation on the Africa's Adaptation Acceleration Program. To further support private sector participation in climate action, we have recently established an initiative with support from the Fund for African Private Sector Assistance, FAPA, to boost private sector investment for NDC-aligned climate action in 6 countries. These include Angola, Egypt, Morocco, Mozambique, Nigeria, and South Africa. Through this initiative, 7 scoping assessments were developed in those countries, plus another Africa-wide study to identify entry points and barriers for private sector participation in the implementation of NDCs. We have also developed dedicated tools for SMEs and financial institutions to mainstream climate resilience and green growth. These include the first tool, which is about climate opportunities and risk screening for SMEs to help them identify opportunities for climate investment. The second tool is the greenhouse gas accounting tool for SMEs to assess their climate footprint and help them mobilize climate finance. And finally, the third tool is a guideline for mainstreaming climate change into line of credit to enable the bank to mainstream climate change into its own line of credit for financial institutions. We are currently engaged in NDC process in several countries, and we are hoping to do more in engaging with private sector, especially SMEs in Africa on this particular area. In this regard, we are currently developing a 500 million financial sector credit facility for SMEs to scale up support to African financial institutions and SMEs to enable them mobilize climate finance and green investment. This facility will provide a comprehensive approach to resolve mobilization for green investment in Africa. I understand that there is CFA Global and CFIA Nigeria, and my team has already been meeting with both teams with the overarching goal to partner with CFA Global and CFIA Nigeria to scale up activities that support green investment in Africa. Just last week, my team met with the CFIA Nigeria in Lagos to kickstart this conversation. Going forward, we'll also engage with CFA Global to agree on the scope of work and organize a workshop by end of the month to put put on paper a partnership agreement between the two institutions. To conclude, I would like to highlight the activities of the Climate Change and Green Growth Department, which include largely mobilizing climate finance, allocating our own climate finance to climate-related interventions in Africa. We'll continue to play an active role in developing new sources of climate finance, including those that are already being implemented, such as the Canada AFDB Climate Fund, which lends concessional finance to climate and gender projects in Africa, and also the Room to Run initiative with the UK government, under which the UK has guaranteed a portion of the bank's debt in order to enable the bank to lend more money to climate-related projects. New initiatives are in the pipeline, including the adaptation benefit mechanism, which will be showcased at the COP27 here, and the African Green Financing Facility Fund to help establish and capitalize climate green banks in Africa. With this, I thank you very much and wish us all a fruitful deliberation.
Thank you very much for those remarks, Dr. Alhamdu. Really interesting to hear what the bank is doing. Just to remind you that the CFA has been implemented in other African countries as well, and you mentioned a few of those initiatives in each of the respective countries. So we'll also continue building the networks so that we can round out the ecosystems in all the countries in which the CFA is being implemented. So thank you very much for just giving us a sense of the level of activity that's taking place across the continent. We're now approaching, I think, what is my super favorite part. I've enjoyed all the insights that we've heard thus far, but I particularly enjoy hearing what's happening in the various CFA countries themselves. And so we're joined here today by Jack Radmore from South Africa. So he's part of the delivery partnership that's implementing the CFA in South Africa. Jack is from Green Cape. We have Sandra Farid, who's from Egypt, from Acumen, and they are the delivery partner for the CFA in South Africa. And Obi Oguchukwu, who's also implementing the CFA in Nigeria. So we have a really wonderful opportunity to get insights into how the CFA is being implemented and some of the opportunities, the challenges, the successes that we've seen thus far. So having said that, Jack, I'd like to invite you to please give us some reflections on what is happening in South Africa.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, honored guests. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you this morning. And Ritzmete, thank you for the introduction. I think earlier in the panel before us, we heard that there, from a financier's perspective, is a pipeline challenge. They can't see bankable projects coming through. If you sit in some other sessions, you hear that there's a financing problem and there's lots of projects looking for finance. So I really do want to commend our BEIS colleagues and the UK government for setting up this platform to bridge that gap, to find the financiers that are out there and working and find the strong pipeline, support them, and then link those two together. And I really think this is a great program that can hopefully have some real impact on the ground in the different countries in which it's working. So South Africa started our program in the middle of COVID lockdown, and we have continued to grow, and we really do see the opportunity to drive that. We've just kicked off our second round of CFA with a new cohort joining us. We started this program in 2021 with a landscape mapping, really trying to understand from both the demand and supply perspective what is happening in the South African economy. From a demand perspective, really unlocking that there are significant projects in energy, mobility, the agriculture sector, circular economy, and water, all looking to try to drive impact while unlocking the financing that's available. From a supply perspective, really seeing that there is a significant gap the earlier you see in the project development phase, so this pre-feasibility, feasibility stage, and that there is almost no venture capital industry in South Africa. So really trying to understand what needs to happen to drive and unlock those spaces. From that foundation, we launched our first call for proposals, where we had more than 120 applications. So a very significant pipeline of high potential climate projects. That investment pipeline represented more than $10 billion worth of demand, excluding a couple of big outliers. That's probably closer to a $3 to $4 billion pipeline of high impactful companies. We selected and supported 13 of those projects to really work towards getting them ready and investment ready to stand in front of financiers. Within 6 months of that first cohort completing, 3 of our projects have reached financial close, securing just over $31 million worth of investment directly into the South African green economy. That is quite a significant impact, right? So you've joined a program, within 6 months, you've raised $31 million. And that just is a snapshot of what is possible as we continue to drive this program out from this first cohort. We've launched our second call for proposals, seeing an increase in demand from that pipeline, close to 170 new projects putting in applications, and really seeing that the second round is maturing and seeing a better round of applicants. This year, we couldn't bring it down to less than 15, so we've selected to support 15 companies in this round. And this represents a pipeline of more than $140 billion worth of investment that is ready to go into the South African economy. And that ranges from rather small projects looking for rapid working capital through to really large infrastructure projects looking to unlock, for example, the power to X market of green hydrogen in the South African economy. So we are really excited to continue to support our first round of cohorts that will continue to raise, and to support this new round of cohorts that will start to work, get ready to raise, and join us in London in March next year to really try to unlock some of the international value that exists outside of just the South African space. Next, we will be launching our in-country event, hopefully staying at the same time as the E-Prix, the first electric Grand Prix in South Africa in February next year, to hopefully attract some additional investors to be part of that process and really put South Africa on the world stage for what it is doing locally to drive both climate investments and to mitigate some of the challenges we're seeing from climate change. Beyond that, we're starting the conversations of really embedding this process into the South African way of being. We've heard from the DBSA previously, AFD have now just presented, AFDB have been presenting. So how do we start to embed this process of unlocking this cohort and this pipeline of projects and really putting them in front of the right financiers? And how do we make that part of the South African process as we go towards longer term impact? So I really do want to thank you, and I really am looking forward to the continued conversation around how do we ensure that there's a strong pipeline of projects, and how do we ensure that financiers are ready to take responsibility for changing their investment mandates to invest in companies that can achieve green outcomes. So thank you very much, and I do hope to enjoy the rest of your pop session.
So thank you very much for that presentation, Jack. It's always so exciting to see what is happening on the ground, and it's a great privilege to be part of the program that's, you know, reviewing and seeing the degree of potential that we have in the country. I think the level of readiness, the fact that we had to expand the number of projects that we're supporting this year, I think is a testament to the degree of uptake and readiness that we're seeing in the market. So that's a really exciting.
So good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome in Egypt. We're very happy to have you all, and I hope you're having a good time so far. I have to say I'm a little bit jealous from what has been presented by Jack here, because they had 120 projects, we had only 46, but I think this gives us an amazing drive for our second round of projects. So thank you, Jack, for this competitive drive you put in us. I think Egypt, when we talk about the climate finance in Egypt, it's very important to mention the fact that it's a very virgin market. We're still starting from scratch. The word climate finance or green finance is even a new, these are new terms that I think the CFA has helped a lot introduce to the market. Maybe we were the second project in Egypt to discuss the two concepts of green finance and climate finance. So I think this the CFA contributed a lot to pushing the whole, of course, COP as well, pushing the whole concept of green finance and climate finance. Adding to that, I will use one of Ian's very accurate description of the lost middle. I think in Egypt, when it comes to investment overall, it's not just the green or climate investment. We have a very big strata of what I would call as well, following Ian's description, the lost middle. Those who are not big enough for banks, those are not techie or innovative enough for VCs and angel investors, that are definitely making very impactful projects, but are not fitting the typical categories in Egypt, whether being bankable or very interesting for the seed funding or angel investment. And I think this is where the CFA comes. And the interesting part of the CFA as well is in Egypt is that we see the government very interested in to play a role in pushing the agenda of climate projects. So we're not only serving the private sector or the entrepreneurs, we're also serving the government, because what was very interesting when we called out for the proposal and we started having our first in-country event hosted in the ambassador's residence, which was definitely a very nice night. Thank you for that. This is when we saw the government being very interested. The Ministry of Planning, the Ministry of Finance, the Central Bank of Egypt were very interested because they have a mandate now to implement climate-related projects. And with having no expertise, whether in technical expertise or financial expertise, they come for us for advice and for help. And I think this is very interesting because the CFA is not only playing a role now in capacity building of the private sector, but it's also a capacity building for the public sector. Adding to that, the capacity building for the financial institutions in Egypt, where blended finance or the green finance is a completely new venture for the Egyptian banks and for the Financial Regulatory Authority, whether the central bank or the FRA. These are very new concepts. And they have sought our support for capacity building as well. So as I have walked you through, it's not just the typical climate private sector support. Maybe Jack should be jealous of us in that part. It's also a full-fledged support for the whole ecosystem, if I may say that. It's for the public sector, for the ministries who are now mandated to push the agenda of climate projects, for the financial institutions who are now also mandated to give credit to green projects. And of course, we cannot fully depend on green finance. So also the concept of blended finance is now on the table, that we cannot fully depend on typical green finance. So how can we work on a blended finance model for the financial institutions to work on, as well as the public sector enabling environment and the enabler like the Ministry of International Cooperation, the Ministry of Finance, and as I said, the Ministry of Planning. So we are now in the cycle one. We are done with the landscape mapping, which is going to be probably published either today or tomorrow. You have received so far in this phase one 46 projects. We are still in the filtration phase. We are still in discussions with some of the projects. For some of them, we're still requiring more details. But the next step would be another in-country event. The other one that was held in the ambassador's residence was basically a launch of the CFA program, the launch of the call for proposals, and then comes the in-country event, and then comes the event in London next March. As I have said before, there are very limited finance possibilities for those projects in Egypt. So taking them out for a roadshow for investors, whether in London or generally in Europe, is definitely a plus for those projects. We see projects working in all different spheres. And for example, in Egypt, we have a project, a whole VC that is being established to work on land use. And then we have the discussion internally whether land use is considered a climate project or not. And then looking at Egypt and the resources that Egypt has, land is one of the very important resources of Egypt, whether for agriculture purposes or solar panel purposes or whatever use they can be used for. So even that we have, I think we'll be pioneering among other countries in how we define green projects. So as an example, you will find projects that are purely alternative, environmentally friendly land use projects that are using the lands, available lands for alternative usage that definitely have a green aspect to them. And so that's it. And again, welcome in Egypt, and we're very pleased to have you, and we're hoping that you continue to have a great time at COP. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandra, for that introduction into the CFA in Egypt. I just wanted to let you know that consider yourself amongst a whole family. We're at different stages of implementing the CFA. So I'd like to refer to it not as competition, but perhaps as increasing ambition, and that we are all, I think, available to share our insights and knowledge on how to make things happen at an even greater level, but also to take on board some of the lessons and wonderful achievements that you're already set to accomplish in Egypt. So thank you very much for that insight. I'd now like to call on Obi Oguchukwu from CFIA, who's going to be reflecting on what the CFA looks like in Nigeria. I think as one of the, perhaps the older programs, if I may say, on the continent, really looking forward to the insights on having participated in the CFA over the past few years.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I just want to try and summarize what the CFA has been doing in Nigeria under three headers: the governance framework, a platform for expanding technical and strategic dialogue, and platform for mobilization of resources in a pipeline. I thought it was very helpful when the AFDB representative talked about they've been having conversations with CFIA. One of the things that we've been able to progress is to have a permanent entity in Nigeria. So when he talks about CFA Global, it's sort of a legacy program that continues to support the process. But moving forward, we've incorporated an entity of which we've got 3 board members. I'm a member on the board, and that will be the vehicle that we will use to transition to a permanent CFA. On the strategic dialogue, we were at COP26, where we had a side event with the Rural Electrification Agency, which is one of the entities within the government that supports mobilization of financing for climate and renewable energy. And as a result of that participation, we developed interest from Standard Chartered and Citibank, who are part of the GFANZ. Interestingly, there was a report that was prepared some time ago by FSD Africa, which is a DFID supported program, which talked about the CFIA and the importance of the CFIA engaging with the GFANZ. So it was, I don't know whether it was coincidence or driven by that report, but in the conversation with Citibank and Standard Chartered, we've set up a technical working group where the idea is to explore avenues by which funding and projects can be identified. It's also led to an interest from what's known as the Bankers Committee in Nigeria, which is the meeting point for the central bank and domestic banks to discuss developments in monetary policy within the economy. The Bankers Committee has a subgroup, an ESG subgroup that we've had discussions with, and they're looking at having a post-COP session to assess the opportunities. And also they're planning to have a retreat in December where CFA will be invited, the Director, Department of Climate Change, and also the DG of the Climate Change Council. Now, one of the things that's happening is that on the public sector side, the government about a year ago enacted the Climate Change Act, where they established a climate change council, and a DG has recently been appointed. CFA is exploring avenues to have a conversation, because within the act, there's a provision for the setting up of a climate change fund. And that would require significant support in terms of the kind of instruments that you park within that fund. On the technical working group, we've also been having discussions about the government's efforts to set up a just energy transition plan. I think it's interesting that South Africa and Egypt are here, and they have actually progressed significantly in that respect. So as an incentive for Nigeria to move in that direction. But again, the thinking in terms of the projects, the climate benefits, this is where CFA is important, because most times the proponents come forward with projects, but they haven't really articulated the climate reason behind these projects. And this is essentially the missing element. And one of the things I've been hearing a lot about at this particular COP is implementation, carbon credits. How do you move these projects to a level where they can actually realize the credits in offshore markets? As an example, there's a project that was implemented in Kenya, where IFC was involved in that, and they were able to harvest the credits and sell them, and they used the proceeds to service the debt. Now, these are the kinds of things that we would need to be having conversations with Citi and Standard Chartered on. And one of the important things to note is, the flow of climate finance to Nigeria. Again, referring to this FSD report, they had indicated that about 1.9 billion came to Nigeria between 2020 and 2021, but 77% of it is public debt, and mostly multilaterals and bilaterals. So clearly there's a need for the CFA in there to boost that climate, the private sector element on climate. But one of the things they also mentioned in the report, that is Nigeria is better at mobilizing private sector funds than the rest of the region, at 23%, while the rest of the region is at 14%. So when Sandra was saying she was jealous about the South Africa situation, I had to throw this in there to move Nigeria up a little bit, because our pipeline is not as appealing. But what this essentially tells us is that we're in the right market, and there's momentum that we can ride on to ensure that we deliver on the targets. So in summary, we're going to continue to have in-country events to get the proponents to come forward. We've formally launched the CFIA. It's incorporated, it's a legal entity. Our conversations with Citibank and Standard Chartered and the Bankers Committee, we hope, will lead to a situation where they have a stronger commitment to the product, not just on the technical side, but also as an institution that they host within the country to continue the conversations. And we continue to have discussions with various proponents about their prospective projects. The AFDB dialogue is a key part of that. And some of the proponents from the previous iteration are also in the background. They're willing to explore funding opportunities. I think I'll stop there, and thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Obi, for giving us a sense of what the CFA looks like for Nigeria, some of the dynamics. I think I concur with you on the point of really focusing on the momentum that has been gained. I think wonderful conversations that you're having, and really activating and sparking a whole series of collaborations going forward. So we do look forward to your pipeline growing, I think, increasingly year on year. With having a bit of an insight of what's happening in the different countries, and I think acknowledging the different starting points of the dynamics that are being dealt with, we do have an opportunity to take some questions from the floor or considerations or thoughts that people would like to share. And I'm happy to allow people to do so.
Thank you very much. Try and stop a politician from speaking like that. I see what you were doing. My name's Grant Shapps. I'm the Secretary of State for BEIS, the department behind the CFA, and a job which I'm proud to do, but I've only been in for 2 weeks. This is actually the job that Alex Sharma had when he became president of COP. But my actual interest in this whole subject area goes back a lot further than 2 weeks. Previously, going back 7 years, I was international development minister in the British government, as well as a foreign office minister, and kicked off a lot of projects which attempted to do things like the CFA. But what I was really pleased to hear about this morning, this lunchtime, is just how effective this CFA project has become. And I wanted to just reflect on a couple of details about what some of those projects are actually doing, as well as the great competition that I heard today from Nigeria, South Africa, and Egypt. So as we all know, this has been pretty impressive. It's been running for a couple of years. The Climate Finance Accelerator supports projects which result in all sorts of different impacts around communities in Africa and beyond. But these are not just run-of-the-mill activities. These aren't just and other wind turbines and heat pumps, the brilliant though both of those things are. What we're talking about here with some of these projects, the 46, the 102, and all the others that were listed, are some of the most brilliant entrepreneurs doing things differently. For example, I kid you not, I find myself talking about bugs here on this platform. Creepy crawlies. Why? Because it turns out that the black soldier fly, has been making quite a buzz as part of this program. These are incredible insects. They are just 16 millimeters long, but they can digest just about anything, and they can be grown by almost anyone. They convert waste products into a sustainable source of some of the most important ingredients for life on planet Earth, from biodiesel to protein meals to insect oil. You may not realize you needed some of these things, but from the way we feed our animals to the way we fuel our cars, the insect economy, which I know you wake up and think about every single day, is really transforming many different areas of our biodiversity and producing energy intensive industrial processes with lower or no carbon. So who's doing this? Well, there's a company called BSF Breeding. They're taking a technical part of the production process. I believe they're in South Africa, and they are looking for anybody who's looking to enter the insect industry by providing the larvae that you need to get started. And this is what's really behind the Climate Finance Accelerator, which was able to secure the loans and triple the capacity for BSF. And this is exactly the kind of really imaginative programs that we're looking for with CFA. That's what we're looking to support, finding opportunities where others maybe wouldn't think to look. But there's, of course, a bigger picture here, which requires me to move on from maggots for just a moment. The United Kingdom, absolutely committed to delivering on our climate pledges and keeping alive that dream from COP26 last year, keeping 1.5 degrees alive. And we're absolutely clear that reducing greenhouse gas doesn't mean setting out to do less. We don't want to just stop the world from turning. We want to get to net zero and deliver more in the process, more growth, more security, more prosperity for all. And that's the path that requires inventive, sometimes insect-related solutions. And finance will be the fuel for this green transition. And that's why the Climate Finance Accelerator, the CFA, is so crucial. In Africa, it strongly supports the work of other of the UK funded programs, the sort of things that I was talking about from the days of DFID and now the FCDO, including financial sector deepening in Africa that we've been hearing something about, and the private infrastructure development group. And as the British Secretary of State for Business, I want our world leading financial sector in London, in the UK, to help drive this globally. And you've heard about the event next spring. It's really encouraging to hear about so many fantastic different world leading ideas as we walk around this pavilion, as we see the barriers, the enablers for mobilizing finance in Africa. And my team are thoroughly looking forward to that CFA event in March in the City of London, in an undisclosed, brilliant location, so secret, so top secret, that I don't even know it myself. But I will look forward to being there. It'll be a unique opportunity to showcase some of the most promising projects supported by CFA and share insights to the best approaches for freeing up funds at scale and delivering on these challenges together, just as those we've heard about here in Egypt, in Nigeria, and in South Africa. Because what we're hearing today is that CFA works, and the countries that are using it know it's working, and we need to ensure that we can expand the model and carry it through to many different countries. So my colleagues here from the Department for Business and Climate, for the Finance Accelerator team, will be putting out feelers to interested parties during COP. And I urge you to get in touch with the partnership teams. They're just here at the front. Together, we can manage this metamorphosis in a way that tackles climate change. And even if it does mean finding the green in the grubs, these little insects and many other technologies, I know we can use these to make ourselves a much more prosperous, cleaner, greener planet that has a healthy future ahead of us all. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much for those energetic closing remarks. We'd like to thank you once again for welcoming the CFA proponents and just really reflecting on the successes and specific notable projects that you've also encountered as part of this program. I would like to just remind you that we are having various country events taking place in the respective countries that have presented today, but that we will also be having the London event in the next year. I note that our time is almost up, so I would really just call on you and welcome you to approach, I think, any one of us individually at our the pavilions immediately after the session if there are questions or thoughts or requests for any more information on the CFA implementation. But I'd really like to thank our panelists, our speakers today who have joined us, and to you who are joining us online as well as in person. It was a great pleasure to have this conversation with you on the CFA and how it's been implemented all across, I think, the world, but most notably on the African continent. Thank you very much to you all and have a great COP further.
Okay, great.